The Venus Project has a long history. It's based on the work of Jacques Fresco, who was born in 1916 and died in 2017 at 101. He was kind of a multidisciplinarian. He left school early, but studied a lot of different subjects because, well, he went through the Great Depression in New York City, saw just a lot of horrendous things happening, and many people being thrown out in the streets, and there were still things available. There were industries, and there was technology available in factories and farms, but everything just stopped. So he couldn't make much sense of that, and he started searching what was the problem, and he searched many different social designs like communism and socialism and mankind united and technocracy, and learned a lot from the different areas, but didn't find anything satisfactory. So he spent his whole life really trying to search out how to make better living conditions. He really thought of things in terms of systems approaches and felt it wasn't individual things within the society, but the whole structure of the society itself need to be changed.
So is there a term that people can relate to that describes what he was going for?
Well, there's the historical term he used to use, which was socio-cyberneering. Real long term.
Say again, sorry.
Socio-cyberneering. So it's like socio-cyber and like engineering, which meant like there's a few different definitions of it. He would describe it as cybernation, right? Like computer technology applied to the management of social affairs and that kind of thing. So this would have been in the 1970s, where computers were, starting to blossom more, and there was a lot of hope for what they'll be able to accomplish and how they'll be able to serve mankind. And so he always imagined that would be a big part of our governance, is some kind of computerized process for processing, decision making, prioritizing, that kind of stuff. So yeah, but like the Greek root of it, socio-cyberneering, it's actually socio pertaining to society. Cyber actually means to steer in Greek, right? The root word of it, and then earing is like to make happen. So society steering to make happen.
Very good. Yeah. So when people look at your very impressive website, we'll see at the banner at the top, the header photograph is of, what would you describe that as? A circular building. There's a star-shaped dome at the centre with buildings, presumably housing, around it. What was that vision? Because when I came here, I was hoping to see that, but you've got 10 buildings, that doesn't exist, but presumably that was Jacques' vision
of a city.
Of a city. So yeah. Could you explain that, please? Because people will look at your website.
Well, that's not up on the website now.
Yeah,
it used to be.
There's a circular arrangement on the website, but you could just search Google Images. You'll find all kinds of images from his work. But yeah, that's an ideal city, right? Like an optimal, ideal, preferable kind of city that we'd be able to construct under ideal conditions. It's concept designs, but the objective is always to build one from scratch, and then try to move a culture into it and develop a sustainable, self-contained, self-sufficient kind of system.
And why is this? What is this need to create this city, this culture? Where does this arise from? And then how can it happen in the future? I know these are very basic questions, but I have to start from a beginning.
Sure. Well, he felt the culture essentially shaped behavior. And he kind of broke down why there was war or poverty or hunger. He wanted to really work on these issues and eliminate unnecessary suffering. So he felt that, one, our monetary system, the use of money, was a real detrimental factor to human beings, essentially, and the earth, obviously. So he tried to organize a society that used science and technology for the betterment of humankind and the environment, And he always felt that he always thought in the future we would be automating things. I don't know if we've quite gotten that far in terms of doing that in terms of government, as he felt in the future that would be automated as well, or could be, if we wanted to go that direction. So the city would be, he felt that we should really build from scratch, from the ground up, instead of trying to change the cities that we have, because they're really not that efficient in any way, shape, or form. And his was a whole self-contained city. You design 1/8 of the city and have many different people in different fields work together so the whole thing worked as a whole, and then you duplicate that. And he always called it like a university city, like an organism that's always changing and people are learning and it's growing. And you look at what's happening in real time and you change certain things that are not happening as quickly as possible. So it was, and it was self-contained. It had the agriculture on the outside, and it was mainly for research and development, for improving things, making things better, stronger, faster. Things that don't wear out and break down, eliminate planned obsolescence, and would be available to people. There would be access centers. So people, so you eliminate, today we sell things and make them wear out and break down. And so we're really plundering the Earth's resources just for profits. So his city was based on different value systems and constructed differently and run differently.
So this is a self-sustaining city. So it has agriculture on the outside and a community, which is important for people to be together on the inside. What are the main objectives? So what was the alternative to capitalism? Did Jack and yourselves think up something, a solution?
Yeah, well, he referred to it as a resource-based economy. That's the term that's been popular in the history of the project. And there's been a few variations of that term over the years. People have taken it and adapted it. But RBE is what's referred to for short.
Say again?
RBE, so resource-based economy. Yeah. But it's typically thought of in a global context where the entire world is operating under a resource-based economy where there is in fact no money as the means of exchange, right? Where it's more a matter of like scientifically measuring and managing your resources, right? Tracking the flows and the sources and sinks and all of the sort of the systems dynamics of the entire planet is modeled and understood, and the resources are managed through a sort of calculation of that sort, but without money, right? Without the private exchange of money. People have asked what would the alternative to money be? Like technically, what is the mechanism? To replace the price mechanism. And I think maybe we have some initial examples of that emerging with these DAO systems. These decentralized autonomous organizations. That's mainly just the horizon of what the system might be like, run through computation, right? Rather than private exchange and all that. So that's always been a big question: is how would you actually make that work, a resource-based economy? Because the price system, the non-monetary system, has had such a long history and so ingrained. Our imaginations are heavily anchored on that way of life. So to see outside of that, it's very difficult. But and it's just logistically difficult too, to circumvent the inevitable processes that kind of fall into place that causes a monetary system.
Jacques essentially felt that we have enough technology to make things abundant, and once things become abundant, there's really no use to charge for it, no need to charge for it. And that's how he felt technology should be used.
Yeah, that was kind of the trick, is the price mechanism kind of goes away when there is a high enough abundance of at least the necessities of life, right? Food, water, shelter, perhaps clothing, medicine, education. Those things can be provided for free because you've been able to generate enough abundance of those things then the price mechanism kind of it becomes obsolete or irrelevant, right? Not as necessary anymore. Beyond that, it's another question how long it would take to phase out the price for everything. But at least the necessities of life, that's at the outset what's most important.
Well, hearing what you both have to say has just made me realise that it's not only a case of phasing it out, but also we grow into a society where I think we inherit a subconscious kind of greed and expectation always. So how do you take that out of people? Because I think we all have it almost, don't we?
Well, it's all been ingrained because the more greedy you are, the more things you get, and usually the more things you get off the back of others doing them. So it's not that people are born greedy. They're not born with greed or prejudice or envy or bigotry or anger in that sense, but you pick it up in the culture. And if Jacques always felt that if you change the culture, then human behavior would change. If there were things available, if you don't have money in your wallet, you don't have to hit somebody over the head to get something. If things are available, it changes the way you think about things. Of course, if there was somebody going through the transition of that change, that would kind of be leftover behavior. But I think if they saw that they have access to things and they don't have to hoard things, that it's always available, why hoard things in your closet when you can go to the access center and use anything you want and return it if you don't need it? So more things are available for everybody. There are more amenities available for people. But and if you do use it every day, then you can keep it. Why not?
Fantastic. So can I ask, and this is a bit how can I say, I mean, this is the vision, but how do you implement it? Is that the stage that you're at now? Is how, because you've got all the ideas and you know how to go about it, but how do you? Because the CGI photograph is so stunning, and I think all the people that I've spoken to about this are so excited because they were hoping that it actually did exist.
That's right.
But how do you go about implementing this?
Well, now we're looking at a lot of different scenarios.
Yeah, this is a long-term vision, right? I mean, Jacques was a visionary, and a lot of this was to kind of give the inspiration for people to strive towards something for the long term. Would it look exactly like this by the time it arrives? Maybe not. Maybe there'll be different materials, different construction methods that reforms the way the buildings are presented. But from the current standpoint, projecting forward into the future, this is what Fresco was able to conceive, given what he knew. And, you know, from another mind, it might have been projected differently. With more information, it might be projected differently. But ultimately, this was the best he was able to achieve in giving sort of an inspirational and kind of optimistic outcome if humanity put themselves to the task and assembled their knowledge to create a more humane and ecologically responsible world, right? Now, how far in the future is it? If the world could get organized around these ideas, no one knows. But we have to look at the present day, right? And the conditions that we're confronting now and the prevailing constraints, the emerging constraints, which become ever more restrictive, right? As humans continue to kind of use and abuse the planet and its resources. So that's what we're most concerned with now, is how to navigate the constraints to even have a chance to achieve something like this. And so we've spent a lot of time in the recent years studying that topic, so we can better formulate what would a transition process look like, transition to this outcome, right? What would be the transition strategy? What would be the viable first steps to initiate something that can establish the basis for a paradigm like this? And that's kind of where we're at now. It's sort of an evolution of the ideas with regards to the transition, how to do it. And so we've started to work with some people that are trying to, in a shared project to initiate something.
Okay, would you like to add something, Roxanne?
Well, I was thinking that, the whole idea is whatever project we do to be scaled up in a resource-based economy. To be a resource-based economy was really a global approach of looking at what we have, taking a survey of what we have all over the world, and being able to understand what we can do with that on a local level as well. instead of shipping goods and services all over the world when it's not needed, as we do today. So we're looking at starting more on a local level. It has to start someplace on a local level, obviously, and then hopefully scaling something up.
Yeah, so we've conceived this term, Venus Evolution, to kind of brand the initiative. You can think of it as like a transition program, right, where we want to work with various groups who are on a similar track, many of which were inspired by Fresco in past years. You know, this project has been well known for probably 16 years now, right, when it first got its initial spark of interest. Prior to that, it was obscure. Jacques and Roxanne were working in obscurity for decades, accumulating all of this work. And so in the past decade or so, it's inspired a lot of people, and they've started their own initiatives. And in a similar vein as this, sometimes some of the designs are similar. The ideas about reorganizing society is similar, sort of variation interpretation of what Fresco tried to teach. And you know, that's the actual legacy of Fresco today. And we're interested in working in starting to work with other organizations, other groups, to bring together a sort of constellation of projects that share information and maybe kind of evolve together towards a common outcome modeled on this. So Venus Evolution, that's kind of the phrase that we're using to represent that beginning of trying to like really implement something.
Well, we've talked about how capitalism is the problem and getting away from that, and the pyramid scheme where you have power at the top and then you have the poor people doing all the work at the bottom. And then it occurred to me that people have to have a purpose in life. Most people, some people don't at all, and that's when they start to have problems and maybe fall out of society. But there has to be some kind of goal. So in capitalism, we just want to survive, so we need to work to make the money so that we can buy things in order to survive. What is the goal and the purpose of the human being in the future within Venus Evolution?
I would say it's survival. Maybe it might sound dramatic, but survival of the human race and the planet, although I think the planet will go on and maybe the waters would get clean, the air would get clean, the land would be rich again. But we seem to be going in the other direction. There's a lot of problems we have, and we don't seem to be facing them maybe in a quick enough time for our own survival. And people have a lot of problems today within the system that we work under, a lot of stress and a lot of physical problems because of it. And ultimately, we feel that people could have a higher standard of living and a better standard of living if the world and the resources were organized differently. The goal, I guess, is simple, as Jacques used to say it, is for the well-being of people and the protection of the environment. And having to reclaim the environment for, we're part of nature and we can't exist without it very well. So.
Well, another question has occurred to me. Do you think it's inherent in mankind and humanity that we have to fight? Because there's never really been a year in our history when we haven't been fighting with somebody else. But is that because of capitalism, or before capitalism came along, when it was like, what was it called, a bartering system? Were people fighting in? I think they were, weren't they? So do we have to have a complete change of mentality in order to be able to live like this within Venus Evolution?
Well, Fresco would probably say that those are consequences of scarcity. So as long as there's scarcity, there will be conflict like that. So that's why he made it such an objective to produce an abundance through cybernation, through the organization of technology and advanced automation. So to the extent there's scarcity, yeah, that's probably going to be an ongoing problem, is some form of conflict with people. But there are ways to mitigate it, for sure. There's certainly more peaceful cultures that have existed in history, and many of them were wiped out, unfortunately, because of some kind of invading adversarial culture. So history does show that it's possible, even in scarcity, to live in greater peace, but it seems to be wrecked somewhere along the way because of some other group probably trying to get resources.
In that case, how does the system run? Is there a committee of people at the top, or is it done by a kind of consensus where people all agree? I mean, that goes in, I mean, there's so many questions I could ask you, but how is it run so that everybody's happy?
Well, Fresco typically prioritized scientific method, right? So trying to evaluate everything on the basis of how would you assess it scientifically, right? Opinions were less relevant, right? If there's evidence, if there's data, we should look at that first. Now, people's needs, that still needs to be taken into account, you know, what they need. But opinions that are just kind of how you feel about it based on misinformation or lack of information, that tends to be less useful. So pretty much developing a governance process based on scientific analysis. And to the extent you rely on computers, it makes it a lot faster to do. Right? Humans sitting around with paper and like trying to read and all that can be very time consuming and inefficient. So to the extent you can set up some kind of computerized, automated filtering of answers, then you can move faster.
So what are the main priorities when you begin this city? What are the different elements? Presumably housing and food are really important because people need to shelter and they need to survive by eating food. So they need to start growing themselves. Do people volunteer to go and grow while other people volunteer to educate and to do health? Could you explain how those systems run, please?
Well, I mean, we would be between systems. I can speak about, ideally, if we're able to do a first project or a first city, we would want to be able to make things accessible. You need transportation, clean transportation. First of all, you need energy before anything happens, because everything is based around energy. And that would have to be worked out. We can talk about those possibilities later if you want. But so you need food, clean transportation, healthcare, relevant education to the environment and one another around you, you know, and what the system needs in terms of a relevant education. You need clean water, clean air, arable land, you know, to grow food and the processes for doing that. So essentially, you need a lot of, for the first city, and to get things done, you need a lot of technical people. It's not so much based on, you know, the main word today for how things should be done, I think is, they use democracy a lot. But I don't know, I mean, I didn't vote for the last war. I don't know what that really means. You can't really initiate a lot of things on your own. So democracy, it really, like Nate was saying, it depends on, Jacques used to talk about applying science and technology to the social system. So if you need a bridge built, you don't vote on it, or if you need your appendix out, you don't turn to your neighbors or your family and have a vote. You go to people who are competent in that field, and those are people you would trust more. It's not a democratic process. It's those who are skilled in the area and have studied that. So it's more based on that type of thing.
Yeah, more of a meritocracy. That's the typical term that sort of represents it.
Could you say that word again?
Meritocracy.
Meritocracy. Okay, that's for the sake of the transcript later on. Thank you. Well, presumably people in power won't want this to happen because they're going to lose their power. So how will this be able to happen? I'm sorry, I feel like I'm almost repeating myself, but I mean, I have visions of Trump getting in November, and he's the last person that's going to want this to happen.
Well, that's what we're dealing with now is strategically, how can we avoid the opposing forces that would work against implementing a system like this? And the current strategy is to first look for areas that are geopolitically disinteresting, right? Where no one's looking, no one really cares about that area of the world, and it may find itself subject to less scrutiny, right? From governments or corporations or the military or whatever it might be, various vested interests or interest groups that want to undermine it for ideological reasons or financial or industrial reasons. So that's kind of the current strategy we're taking, is looking for more remote locations to develop the first experimental kind of system. Other than that, it's just a matter of being more, let's say, diplomatic with the surrounding people, right? So that they want the system there. At least the general population, that they appreciate what's being created because it helps them in some way. That helps preserve it, protect it to some extent. But there's no foolproof safeguard, you know. If some government or multi-billion-dollar corporation or a military or something, if they really wanted to undermine something, they could. So there's no fail-safe strategy, but we can mitigate the risks.
Are you able to mention any places in the world that you've realized are viable areas? I mean, if you're able to mention them at all.
Well, we're working with a partner now, and they're looking at 7 places around the world. They have one place picked out that's preferable, that's in a remote area in South America.
Great. That seems to make sense because it's away from a lot of conflict. It has its own conflict, but it won't be as affected by anything that happens terribly in the Northern Hemisphere.
Well, in South America, it's still not completely decimated by civilization yet. There's still a lot of natural environment there that, if it could get under control, still be preserved, and it's a relatively rich place. You know, all of the Americas are really, but it's hard to do anything here in the United States like this.
Yes. So, please, could you talk about what you think is most important next, but in a nutshell, because we don't have, like, we could talk about this for weeks, but could you talk about where your idea for the architecture comes from, please?
Nature. Some of it.
Yeah, really, it is nature. It's using the least amount of materials to cover the most space, and that's the way Jacques thought about it in terms of the domes, and they're very strong. The domes that we have here in the buildings are concrete and steel. They could be made of different materials. Hemp is an interesting thing to experiment with, I think. But the buildings that we have here are essentially, we are in hurricane areas, so they're about as hurricane proof as you can get. They're domes, there's no roof to blow off. The windows are very strong. They're fireproof, termite proof, concrete. And they get stronger with age. So this is the way we build. And the dome was really based, the shape from nature, as Nate mentioned.
Yeah. I mean, there's seashells, there's things like that, which inspired Jacques in some cases. I think it would take a redwood tree to collapse one of the buildings. The redwood tree, like in California, there's a giant one. That would have to fall on it.
Very good. And this is made from concrete. Would that be?
These are concrete and steel. They're tremendously reinforced. Because, Jacques used to talk about how he's seen houses just be uplifted from the foundation in hurricanes living in Florida, and he has seen houses burn to the ground in 5 minutes. So we really have no wood in the houses. We had no curtains, no rugs, no drywalls to get damaged if there was flood. And this area is unfortunately in a flood zone, 100-year flood zone, and we have had floods here.
Have you considered any other material? Because I know people in Europe who go, why don't they use cob? Because traditionally this style of structure would be made from cob, clay and earth and straw bales, that kind of thing. But presumably you'd have to start sort of mining that. I mean, is the production of concrete in the future going to be? It's not going to make much difference to your purpose, is it? I mean, it's a necessity, so it's not going to be detrimental. Is it the production of concrete? It's like a small thing in comparison.
Well, there's an alternative. There's geopolymer, which might be less industrially intensive and carbon emittive alternative.
Very good. And how would you be making your power? What are the main ways you'd be making your power in the future for transport and just for heat and energy?
We'd be looking into many different aspects. That's the first thing we'd be looking into and experimenting with in this location, wherever we end up, in the first city, which we are working on now. The first thing in the location we're moving to would be very good with wind and solar, but statistically, at this point, we really can't depend on that scaling up in terms of globally. But we're also looking at thorium reactor. Those are beginning to come online. It's not a uranium reactor for nuclear plants. It has different advantages. But we'd be looking at many different things. This location is probably good for geothermal or deep geothermal drilling. It has potential as well. So it's on the coast, and there's power from the sea and the waves that you can get also.
Yeah. There's also ammonia. We're not counting on hydrogen so much, but ammonia is perhaps going to be a viable energy technology in the future as an alternative to fossil fuels, and it can be treated the same way. It's transportable, it's convenient, you can pump it, So perhaps that, really what we want to do next is probe and experiment with a variety of known energy possibilities, but also lesser known energy possibilities, some that we've kind of neglected or hasn't really developed much because other things turned out to be better, but they're not going to be sustainable, so we got to go back to that, the prior ideas. And then just any radical ideas that people have with regards to energy production. There's new ideas coming out every day, maybe not every day, but very frequently as far as what could be done at the theoretical level, right? We know that theoretically something's possible. A lot of it has to be tested, so that is one of the major objectives, because energy is referred to as the master resource. So if you don't have enough of that, it's hard to do much else.
Well, I was going to ask you next about permaculture and your holistic approach to doing this, but those things exist already, so that's a minor thing compared to what are the biggest challenges that you have at the moment to actually carrying this out. You said the first city will hopefully be built fairly soon in South America, but why hasn't this happened already? What do you need the most of? Do you need money, or do you need people to help? What are your challenges?
Yeah.
Well, we need both things. In today's culture, you do need finances, and the people we're working with have an experience with that more so than what we have had in the past. We have put out a call for architects and engineers. This was after Jacques died, after 2017, to be able to do some blueprints for a research center. And we got over 350 people who wanted to volunteer, and now that volunteer list is up to 1,200. But it's very difficult to do such a labor-intensive and time-intensive project and develop blueprints, which cost literally millions of dollars for a large project, and do it through a voluntary basis. So we do need funding for something like that.
Yeah, well, and another challenge is, as you said, finances, as with anything, and then the manpower to actually execute. There's a wide spectrum of problems, but I think one that's prominent is in this attempt to implement, you always confront the challenge of altering the idea, or changing, or the idea getting hijacked, or diluting the idea, right? And so, because there's a sort of sincerity that supporters of these ideas have with regards to maintaining the purity of the ideal, right? And as soon as you try to put the ideal on the ground, you have to make compromises. You have to accommodate the needs or the priorities of the people that you're working with, some of which are not entirely invested into this knowledge, the knowledge that constitutes this project. And so you have to work with their knowledge, limitations included, and try to make it work. And so that's really perhaps one of the more fundamental challenges, is how to stay true to your ideal, and what is that ideal. and how deep does it go? Are you able to preserve the values that you're trying to spread in the world, right? So I think that's really the challenge that any group would face who's trying to do something ambitious and optimistic, that's trying to make an improvement, and not just for a better world, but for really anything that you're trying to create. It's always an issue of when the rubber hits the road, how much of the tire do you lose in the process? And does that change where you go, or does it slow you down and you don't go quite far enough? So that's really what worries us these days, is when it comes time to implement, how will you get there without betraying a certain ideal, and how much will people disagree about how to get there, right? That's always a kind of a political issue. People have different ideas about the process, not just the endpoint. You might be able to agree about the endpoint, like an ideal future, but they disagree about the process. And so they split off, or they develop tensions that causes them to separate. So that's one of the things that we worry about as well, as far as keeping everything coherent as we confront all the forces that are moving against us as we try to actually make it happen. Yeah.
Well, this is so exciting because really this hasn't been done before, ever. I mean, in a way you were talking about a utopia, but I guess it has to be without politics at all for it to work, because as soon as politics comes along, then it's going to potentially collapse, because people have different ideas, and even if you start it up, maybe after 5 years it's running really well, something will happen, like a little faction will grow somewhere, and people will stand up and say, oh, we don't like this, and then it will just fall apart. So it's a complete change of view from humanity completely.
And we're inculcated today to a lot of different value systems and ideas that we don't even know we hold. There's game dynamics, and there's self-interests and needs that people have that come into it that might not be maintaining the goals or the end that we want to achieve. And it gets very confusing.
It starts to get very ambiguous how to navigate that terrain. And a big issue is, how can you be sure that you can trust the people that are trying to help you, right? Especially as you get more involved in the business aspect, the financiers, the people who are trying to support the project financially, investors. That's really been something that's kind of slowed the project down over the years, is a fear of the monetary system and the business practices and the kind of complications that you can get into when people start to become more motivated by money and this kind of stuff, and they forget about what this is really supposed to be about. So it's hard to get the right combination of people together, and the right combination in a person individually, right? Where they have business experience, but they also have a sincere intent to improve the world in some way, and are willing to kind of suppress the temptation to gain in the short term. It's hard to find those kinds of people to work with. And
so is there one main factor that is preventing you from doing this immediately? Is it that you have to, because it's fair enough to have to get the money together in order to do it, and then once you've done it, then you can get rid of money. But are you saving up right now? Are you doing some funding for this?
Well, we have donations, a donation option on the website. We are a nonprofit, so there's a donation button for general donation. But it will require funding in the future for initiating an applied project. I mean, we are planning an applied project. We want to build something, and that will require some initial funding, for sure.
Do you know how much?
Well, we do kind of have some numbers. It's a rough estimate, but to get going with finding investment, there's a $1 million cap, or $1 million goal, right? Which is the objective of that is to enable the networking and the traveling to contact the people who are around the world who might be interested. Because those kinds of things are like in-person discussions. They're very sensitive. You got to be able to really convince the person. They have to trust you. So that is the initial like fundraising objective. But the purpose of that is to get big funding, right? The big fish, right? The people who can provide a major contribution. So there's sort of a small goal and then a big goal after that.
Yeah, I was in contact with Jacques Cousteau's grandson because he wants to build an offshore underwater habitat, and it's going to cost him $350 million. And I don't know how far he's got with it, but he did invite me to go down to the seabed to look at a potential site. And I don't have my diving certificate still. I've been talking about getting it for decades now, but I've never got around to it. And it seems like a great idea, but compared to what you're doing, it just seems so obscure, because you're talking about a vision that will support human beings for forever, potentially, without wars, without poverty. It's such a great idea, and it's so ridiculous that this doesn't exist right now. We're not living like this, because why aren't we living like this? Are we not evolved properly? I mean, are we not really that intelligent?
Right, well, among the groups out there who have a similar objective as we do, they're typically less known. They're more obscure, and I think the major issue is I think it just requires extremely sophisticated strategy, requires very high intelligence to execute successfully a project like this. So you have to get the right people together. That's the key thing, and so that's part of our objective going forward, is trying to assemble the right people to constitute a strong team that can actually execute with enough intelligence to circumvent all of the obstacles and pitfalls. I think it's just it's hard to boil it all down to one answer, because for questions like that, there's so much involved and so much can go wrong that really it's all of these factors. But just to touch on a few.
Okay, thank you. Well, you've built 10 buildings here. Are those examples of what will be built in the future?
Not necessarily. Maybe some of the shapes, because they are strong and fit in with the environment. But we really, when I say we, it's me and Jacques who started this. Some other people helped in the beginning, but that then went off to different areas. But we built this on a shoestring budget, essentially, is what I'm trying to say. And we didn't borrow any money. We didn't take out any loans. So we don't have any mortgages. So we built what we could afford to build and not what we wanted to build, essentially. But they are examples of certain aspects of architecture that could be useful in the future.
Yeah, I mean, there's certain principles in the architecture that will persist regardless of what it's made of, and like there's certain structural aspects that are just like laws of physics, good to do.
So what else are you doing here? You're doing permaculture. Could you describe everything?
Well, we really haven't gotten into permaculture. We wanted to.
Yeah, we're actually going to have somebody who's coming to. Well, we're trying to get somebody to come work with us to do permaculture on the site, or at least a greater degree of agriculture and more holistic kind of agriculture.
At times we've had gardens and things like that, but we hadn't concentrated that much in that area, and we didn't have anybody on the land who did. So we concentrated. It depends on. We've been here for quite a while, since 1980, so it depended on what we were doing. For a long time, it was just me and Jacques building these buildings, and we had a large part physically of doing it ourselves as well. And then we concentrated on doing models, architectural models, which you'll see as we walk around, to show. Jacques wanted to show what the future could be like, what the possibilities could be like. That's what a lot of these graphics on the walls come from. These are architectural models as well as renderings. And we did computer animations here, we did books, and we did videos, and a lot of strategy and different things. What else did we do here? The buildings,
They do tours too,
Yeah, they do.
every other Saturday.
Because it is very visual. The models are quite visual in terms of what Jacques felt the future could look like. And, you know, to Jacques' credit, he did a lot of these designs maybe 50, 60 years ago. And when we just did the models maybe about 30 years ago or 20 years ago, 15 years ago. But like when I met him when I was with him for 43 years, he did 5,500 design sketches. He was tremendously prolific, and his you wouldn't like to say art, his ability in art, but technical illustration was superb. And he would just go at these drawings with a pen, an ink pen. I don't know who does that, but so we have an accumulation of a lot of things, and Nate archived all that for years, took years, 5,500 design sketches, over 850 video and audio of Jacques and other things that were done here.
The most depressing aspect of that is that what we have is really only the second half of his life. Everything he did in the first half of his life is gone, lost. So yeah, as much as there is, that's still only half of it, as far as his prolific output.
Yeah, he was designing since he was like about 13. And he started with aircraft because it fascinated him how this heavy thing could fly on the air, It was a problem for him when he was young. But he did a lot of very different designs. And I think if he went to school, it was interesting because he left school when he was 14, but he studied all his life. He used to go to libraries and museums when he was younger on his own. But if he went to school, maybe his helicopters would look like, aeronautical engineering school's helicopters would look like everybody else's helicopters. But they're quite divergent. So.
Well, thank you very much, both of you. Absolutely fascinating. Forgive me for putting you on the spot. How old are you, Nate?
I'm 33.
And how did you come to be here, and what is your job here, your purpose?
Yeah. So I first learned about it. I got just a little glimpse when I was like 12 years old. They were on the Discovery Channel for a little bit of a documentary, and I'd seen that, and it was a very inspiring scene in the documentary. And it just stuck with me. I remembered that for a long time. Like I would think about that guy in that documentary with the magical memory metal, that something he would demonstrate. He would wind up, twist up memory metal, and then heat it with like a hair dryer, and it'll wind up back into shape. And so like to a kid, it's like magic. It's amazing. And there was some aspects of it that were just generally inspiring. Like he was talking about, a better future and that kind of thing. So I liked it so much. In fact, I record, VHS tapes. I recorded it on a VHS tape so I could watch it when it wasn't replaying constantly on the Discovery Channel. Anyway, I just think that's a funny fact about it. When I think in retrospect.
Amazing.
And then later, as I got older, I was a teenager and came across it again in the original documentary. That was the initial impetus to giving this project greater notoriety. And then realized it was the same guy, and it kind of had like a childhood connection for me, and I think it piqued my interest even more because it connected to my past. And in fact, it was because I was watching a video of Jacques, and he did the memory metal thing again. I was like, that's the guy, and I was just amazed. And thereafter, I got very interested in him, his life, his work, his biography. He's such an unusual person. Very, charismatic and knowledgeable person. I was fascinated to learn how could somebody like this come to be, and learned as much as I could about his history, and learned about his surrounding context, the people he knew, and that kind of got me into the archiving aspect, like Roxanne mentioned, where learning about his history, I started to look at his work more, realized it needed to be integrated and organized and digitized, and did that for a while. And then subsequently I got pulled into other things, working on documentary or like various other organizational issues like planning and some administrative stuff and transcriptions of his lectures and a wide variety of things. I've been involved for, I guess, directly involved helping, I guess, 2024?
13 years? I don't know.
Yeah, 13 years. Yeah.
So you're archiving, and then presumably you both want to move to the first city when it starts to be built. Do you have a timeline for that?
Well, we may move there. It depends on a lot of factors, but probably we would hope in the next 10 years something will be built.
And until then, what is your goal? Just to continue archiving? What else will you be doing?
Well, I don't do archiving so much anymore. I'm more involved in like the planning, kind of the tactical and strategic aspects of the project. Curating, looking for the kind of people that we would want to work with, doing a lot of learning, reviewing a lot of research and data out there that is documenting the state of the world, and it's more of a tactical and strategical function at this point, and also just kind of thinking more about how to translate Jacques' general ideas into working processes, especially at the human level, like how we can there's that, and then also how we can organize, like as an organization. How can we exist as an organization? How can we operate as an organization? What are some of the ways we can operate that takes more inspiration from how Jacques talked about things? For example, he would talk about natural law, right? Try to coincide with natural law. Like don't create rules or laws that try to like control people. Try to create a natural flow that is consistent with natural law. So that's an example of how you might think of creating processes for an organization that flows naturally like that, because it taps into reality about people, because it understands psychology, it understands sociology, anthropology, and you use that knowledge to come up with organizational processes and structures. So I've kind of, in my, on the side, I kind of work on that stuff as well. Yeah.
Very good. And are you working on that day to day, every single day here?
It's mixed up. There's a lot of stuff on my plate.
There's
I'm
so much to
juggling a
do.
lot of stuff
Yeah.
all the time. So.
Well, how much of the Venus project is your day-to-day life?
Oh, I'm constantly
Oh, it's
working on it.
100%. You're just Venus
Like,
project.
I'm sleep deprived right now. Probably 16 hours of sleep in the last 72 hours. That's not all the time, but I go through episodes where I spread myself too thin and work a little too hard.
Very good, thank
We
you.
all do. Well, I guess there are just two of us that work at it full time. There are a lot of other people that work at it part time.
So it's you and Nate, Roxanne.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think it is, yeah.
I mean, there's a board of directors,
Yeah.
four members of the board of directors.
And they're doing, well, one is doing an aquaponics farm in India, one of the board of directors, and then there are three of us that work, two of us for full time, and then another person that works on it. He has a family and he's a pilot for United Arab Emirates Airlines, so he's got his plate full. And he's doing educational courses for the Venus Project.
That is fascinating. Wow, a commercial
That's
airlines
the
pilot,
main
but
core.
Yeah, he flies the big, what do you call it, Boeing, the big like
Yeah.
triple seater.
777.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Well, forgive me for asking, Roxanne, but how old are you?
74.
And how long have you been working on this?
I figured that out when you talked about it the other day. 46 years.
So really,
It's outrageous.
that is incredible. Well, respect to you. So what is your goal and your vision for the next 10 years? What do you hope will happen?
Well, hopefully just to stay alive. Well, we are pretty well concentrating on this first project, on a city in Latin America. So it takes a lot of preparation, and I'm doing some drawing for it, but just a lot of organization for that aspect of it, and trying to keep the organization together as well. Maintaining the grounds here and the buildings. Whatever comes up, it's like the history I had. Whatever came up with Jacques, I had to learn how to do different things. I never wanted to learn how to type because I didn't want to be a secretary, but I took dictation from Jacques, so I had to learn how to type. So whatever can be done, whatever I can do, different fields, even if I have to learn it, like editing or things like that, I would do.
Very good, thank you. Is there anything that I've missed that you think is really important?
Yeah, I was just thinking, we do have something called the Jacques Fresco Foundation, which is a separate nonprofit And the purpose of that is to house his entire body. It's a vehicle to present his body of work to the public. And that way he's presented in pure form. Because it's one of those things that happens with somebody like this, somebody who's visionary, who's a great thinker. You get sort of people with varying degrees of commitment to his vision, his ideas. And so one risk that you have in the legacy of that kind of person is you get groups like we were talking about earlier, kind of breaking up, splitting off, challenging each other, developing tensions because they disagree, especially when interpreting, what the teacher said. And there's always a risk of them accusing each other of, well, you're altering the ideas, you're ruining the ideas, you're changing them to suit your own purposes or that kind of thing. So the Jacques Fresco Foundation, the function of that is to eliminate, prevent, resolve that problem by keeping it in pure form, right? Making that available to the public. People can access it. It's purely him in his words as he meant it, without any interpretation from anyone else. So it's a reservoir of his knowledge, and anyone can reference it, a central reference point.
And I just want to mention again, it's a tremendous amount of knowledge. 5,500 design sketches,
Right.
photographs, it's like 1,000 of audio and video.
Well, I mean, it really is 2,000 or 3,000 altogether, various recordings, but some
amazing.
lectures are more important than others, of course. But he, like we were saying, he's very prolific, so we want to give a nice, as full as possible showcase of his body of work, and just treat it formally as a project for a legacy of somebody with a tremendous body of work, and try to publish it formally and give it the best presentation possible for perpetuity.
And we're transcribing all those.
Yeah,
and then
we're
we'd
gonna
like to copy edit
yeah,
and then put them in volumes,
right, and we'll create
printed
we'll create
volumes as well.
We'll create we have many applications for the information, but one more high-tech idea is to create like a Fresco bot, like a Jacques Fresco, large language models like ChatGPT, base it on that, so that you could sit down and talk with them, potentially even in VR. You'll be able to put on a VR headset and like sit there and talk with Jacques Fresco, ask him whatever you want. Personal life advice, analysis of the world, maybe give him new data, and from the basis of the knowledge that's trained into the AI, might be able to work with that new data and, maybe say something approximate to what he would have said. We got to test it all out, but that's going to be a very interesting thing. That's one application of all this transcribing.
And his knowledge was so broad because he was asking the largest question: how did you design a society or a world to eliminate the problems that we have? How do you change human behavior? Is it set, or can it be changed? Or he had to ask all those questions. He felt, well, if human nature was a certain way and people are always going to have to go to war, then why bother? Because it's a lot of work to deal with that. There are not too many people that deal with those questions or study that all your life. It's a hard thing to stick to without having to get sucked into making money and doing a job, which, he did design a lot of things. He was really prolific, so he could live off of some of the things he designed and then go back to working on what he felt was more interesting. So he had a hard time with that too, because he would say that, he was working on knee prosthetics and hip prosthetics when they first came out, and he was doing that for doctors when I first met him, and he was delivering like 7 or 8 different inventions and designs each week. But if he was working on that, he was not a very good business person, so he couldn't leverage saving this much for taxes or this much for rent, and he would go broke and sell off the things in his lab, which didn't mean anything to other people. Mm-hmm. So it's a tough road to take.
He had many setbacks.
Yeah. So, but he stuck to it. As far as I know, he really didn't sell out.
Yeah.
How fantastic, absolutely amazing, and so great that you both knew him and you were his partner, Roxanne, and that you came along before he passed away, which is fantastic. And it's interesting because in my work I've been to and documented so many communities, and people say to me, what is the one community works, especially if somebody's in a community which isn't working. They say, where can I go to live peacefully and happily? You know, I've never come across a community at all anywhere in the world that actually works, because we have this problem of capitalism, money, and then it causes, and then it filters down so many problems. So do you know of anybody else doing what you're doing? Are there any other alternatives around the world that you think could perhaps work, or is it really just you?
Well, I mean, we have our sort of cousin groups, groups that are they're working towards a similar outcome.
We've called them spin-off groups,
Yes.
and they're more than we even knew.
Yeah.
There is a network of people that we have been communicating with, even more so lately, because before this we were kind of isolating ourselves and studying a lot of things to see how what Jacques proposed, how that fits in today and what it takes to get there, what steps we really need to do, and can we do that with our energy constraints even?
Yeah, I mean, he died in 2017, and so it's been a few years. Like Roxanne said, we made an attempt to call for help to design something. Right, but as you're saying, it's hard with volunteers, and we didn't really have the funding, so we set that to the side. And in the last few years, that's been one of our, let's say, guilty pleasures, is doing these reviews of the information out there. Because like a lot of our understanding up to a few years ago has been shaped predominantly by Jacques Fresco, just because we're internal to the project. Our job is to perpetuate these ideas, present them, try to get them adopted by other people. And so much of our understanding was shaped by the knowledge that he taught. And since his passing, the objective was, okay, how can we now integrate that knowledge with present knowledge elsewhere from a lot of other thinkers, and can we converge it towards something even better? Let's just say something more, even more holistic, more broader picture. And we found ourselves quite fixated on the energy and minerals constraints, especially with regards to producing alternative energy, renewable energy technologies. How viable will it be to undergo the various popular transition plans? They call it the Green Transition Agenda 2030. There's a few institutional mandates out there. And so we've been interested, how viable are those things, and what ramifications does it have for the vision we're imagining, right? Because if it's going to be difficult to scale up renewable energy technologies for just business as usual green transition plans, we might think that would have some ramifications for us, but with what we're trying to do. So we've been trying to figure out how do we navigate through those constraints, and it's required a lot of thinking, a lot of learning.
So you're not just constrained by what Jacques' vision was. You can actually build on it and add to it while you're here as well. Mm-hmm. Great. Both of you, do you have a message for people listening and reading for the future, a general message for people? If people are reading this and thinking, oh, that's a great idea, but I feel so frustrated because I can't be a part of that. Do you have any inspiring, positive words for people at all? And generally about daily life, anything that occurs to you, please.
I would say learn as much as you can about what's happening in the culture, and what's been called lately the meta crisis of what we may be facing in terms of the problems that we have.
Did you say meta?
Meta crisis.
Okay.
Yeah.
They call it polycrisis too. Meta crisis, polycrisis.
Happening together, and look into problems of overshoot, of how we are using our resources faster than we can replenish them, and how we are producing waste faster than the earth can absorb it. Look into those topics and see what we're really confronted with.
Yeah. I would say forgive yourself, because the challenges we face are seemingly insurmountable, and people can beat themselves up for failing.